guys. All right, guys. Going over local resting and action potentials. This is like the third time I filmed this because I keep screwing up my words. So slowly losing my sanity. But here we are. So let's start with resting potential. So we know that sodium ions reside in the ECF. We know that potassium ions reside in the ICF. We know that protein fibers also reside in the ICF. We also know that sodium is positively charged, potassium is positively charged, and the protein fibers are negatively charged. So the sodium is going to be these, orangish splotches, potassium is the blue, and the protein are the pink kind of splotches here. So due to the fact that sodium is positively charged, potassium is positively charged, but since potassium is contending with these negatively charged protein fibers, this will lead to essentially a skewing where, these sodium ions are going to be attracted due to the negative charge, due to the combination of the potassium and protein fibers creates a more negative charge. And this will lead to what we call a resting membrane potential due to this difference on the two sides of the plasma membrane. We know that the membrane in this sense is polarized. It's at negative 770 MV. I think it's millivolts, I want to say. I could have mistaken that. And there's something else I want to mention is that we have sodium potassium pumps running essentially constantly. I believe it was mentioned in the lecture. We're essentially going to assume that, sodium's all in the ECF and potassium's all in the ICF to start for just simplicity. But just know that these pumps are constantly running, essentially constantly dispersing these between the two. But like I said, resting membrane potential, negative 70 millivolts due to this difference essentially in charge. So where do we go from there when the membrane is polarized? What happens if it becomes depolarized? Well, an electrical signal will come in and that will lead to the depolarization. So boom, electrical signal hits the dendrites, soma, sent along some axons. Now, if it's strong, it'll hit the axon hillock, which we will get to eventually, but we're not there yet. So we know it starts at negative 70 MV. This is polarized state. But when we have more positive ions coming into the ICF, that's going to destabilize it and depolarize it. I shouldn't say destabilize it, depolarize it, sorry. And that'll lead to a more positive charge. So we're going to bridge towards that plus 35, which we know to the peak. Again, we're not there yet, but we're getting more positive. So like I said, signal, boom, soma, sent along down towards maybe the axon hillock if it's lucky. And due to the signal being sent, we know that this disruption is going to lead to diffusion. So, these sodium gates are initially closed. They're actually now going to open as that signal hits. And it's going to be a short range change in voltage. So we're going to see sodium influx into here, into the ICF from the ECF. And we know, again, that I shouldn't say we, but the way I kind of think about this is GDR. So when we're thinking about local potentials, it's graded, decremental, and reversible, right? That's the big thing to remember. So magnitude depends on the strength of the signal and stimulus that you're receiving. If it's a strong stimulus, it's going to lead to more channels opening. Decremental, so we know that the current's going to get weaker the farther it goes from the stimulus, and then reversible. Once that stimulus stops, the membrane is going to return to its resting potential. Sodium gates are going to close, and the pumps can essentially return sodium ions to where they were initially. So again, this is what we would call a local potential. Still a change in voltage, depolarizing for sure, but not as intense as an action potential because you might not hit that axon hillock. But what if you do hit that axon hillock? Well, the plot thickens because now you have hit the axon hillock, and we know the axon hillock has 7 to 10 times the number of sodium gates, which can lead to a really dramatic change. So I didn't draw it, I should have drawn, but pretend this is kind of the axon hillock. It would be towards kind of the end of the neurons and again, kind of in this little section of the soma. It's not part of the soma, it's kind of the end of it is how I think about it. Again, trigger zone is kind of the big thing to think there. So action potential, we have a much more dramatic change, a stronger stimulation. It's going to hit the axon potential and lead to much more sodium gates opening. So what we're going to see here though, step one, right? Local potential has not happened. There is an electrical potential, but nothing has happened yet. So we're still at negative 70 millivolts or MV. Might be missaying that. I'm sorry, Paul. But we have the sodium in the ICF. Sodium in the ECF, potassium in the ICF. Protein fibers in here as well. Now that stimulus is going to hit and it's strong enough to depolarize that membrane to that threshold of -55. So that is the threshold, -55. The peak is +35, but the threshold is -55. So now we're going to see that those sodium gates begin to open, and sodium is going to go from the ECF into the ICF. It's going to really start to flow in there, as you see. I mean, I know you guys know this. The phospholipid membrane, the plasma membrane, it's right here. So I stopped drawing it on these two because I got really annoyed with drawing out the little squiggles and stuff. But just know it's there. So we have sodium coming in, and the potassium gates are just starting to open. So no real flow yet, but they're starting to open. But that sodium is flowing into the ICF. And we're going to see this value, this depolarization is now happening from -70. We hit that -55, and now we are ascending towards that +35, that peak value. So then next what happens is those sodium gates will now close, and what's going to happen is the potassium is going to open, and those ions are going to diffuse from the ICF into the ECF, so essentially the opposite of where they're normally housed. And now we're going to see that the membrane potential is actually repolarizing due to these potassium ions going out into the ECF. And this repolarization is going to bring us down from that 35 back towards that -70 resting membrane potential value. So like I said, sodium's closed, potassium fully open, they're flying out. And now step 4, sodium's still closed, potassium is just closing, but now we've reached that -70 as the potassium has flowed out and it is now in the ECF and sodium is in the ICF. So again, we've experienced the whole action potential. We're back at that -70, and now those pumps, which I mentioned earlier, can return the cations to the original position. Now, something I want to mention too, which is really important, is that GDR concept, it doesn't hold up an action potential. You can actually flip it on its head. So what's going to happen with an action potential as opposed to a local potential is that you're going to essentially have the opposite of each step. So it's all or none law. So it's either going to fire fully at full strength or it's not going to go at all. It is non-decremental, and it is not reversible. So again, it's not going to decrease, and it cannot be reversed. So it is that opposite of that GDR principle where we know with local, it's graded, decremental, reversible. But once you hit action, it's non-graded, non-decremental, and irreversible. And so again, we know that that's a difference, but I kind of like to memorize it in the GDR thing and then just think of the inverse of it. So yeah, hope this helps you guys. Sorry for the drawings. Yeah, barely keeping my sanity. Got through it in 3 takes. Let's go.